Representatives Diaz-Balart, Salazar, and Gimenez, you are all Cuban Americans. I'm wondering from each of you what it might be that you would like to see happen in Cuba.
It's very simple. Freedom. Freedom, which is the best thing that could happen to the Cuban people, but also to the national security interests of the United States.
To make that island prosperous again, it could have been Taiwan, Singapore. We're only 90 miles away from Miami, the city that I represent, with Western values that 65 years ago, a bunch of thieves took away that possibility. But now President Trump, after 10 administrations, is bringing that possibility back to the Cubans.
In order to make that happen, we need to be free. The greatest example of the difference between communism and freedom is what's happened to Cubans around the world, pretty prosperous people. We've had a tremendous success as an immigrant group. And so Cubans prosper in just about everything we do. There's only one place we don't prosper, and that's Cuba. And so once we have freedom in Cuba, and once we have free elections and we become a friend of the United States, we solve the issue of being a threat to the United States. And then we also solve the issue of the plight of the Cuban people.
You have actually seen what communism can do to a society. Maybe give people at home who have never experienced that a perspective in terms of what it actually did, what that ideology does, and what it did to your home country.
Well, it brainwashes you, first of all. The difference is that the system doesn't work. It's just meant to keep certain people in power, and they do it through force. They put people in jail. They suppress any freedom. And so, yeah, my dad and my mom, my grandmother, they brought us over here to seek freedom. And, a great example of that, Peter Pan. Parents would let their children go to the United States, knowing that they'd have a better opportunity in the United States. I mean, can you imagine that? Letting your children go somewhere else by themselves without you.
Well, and we've seen a dire situation right now in Cuba. They're running out of oil. The country is essentially dark right now. They may be on the brink of famine. President Trump says that talks will happen. We've seen the CIA director, John Radcliffe, recently there. But how do you see this unfolding?
The reason that there's so much hope is because of Donald J. Trump. It's because of President Trump. Because he's not confused, number one. And number two is because he's not willing to look the other way while you have... Because let me tell you, we obviously need to talk about the suffering of the Cuban people. And Cubans can't, will starve, and they don't care. But look, my responsibility, my number one responsibility is to protect the national security interests of the United States while also protecting the American taxpayer. And I have to go back to this. Cuba, that regime is a threat to our national security. The reason we are so hopeful is because this president is not going to continue to allow a regime 90 miles away that has drones that can hit the United States, that harbors fugitives from U.S. law. And let's not forget that now, just this week, we are commemorating the murder of 3 Americans and 1 U.S. resident that were murdered in cold blood by the Cuban regime. Nobody has been willing to do anything about it until Donald Trump.
For years, the Western Hemisphere, which is our backyard, has been completely forgotten. That's why you had a Nicolas Maduro. That's why you had a Fidel Castro for 65 years. But up until this administration that we have said, wait a minute, America First agenda, like Mario is saying, is the Western Hemisphere agenda. I always say, long live the Americans, because the Western Hemisphere wants to do business with American companies, with the American government, and that's what Trump recognized, and that's what he's doing. Look what he did with Maduro. That was a mothership of evil in Western Hemisphere, because from the drug standpoint, there would have been no Venezuela if Cuba would have not sent the book of repression. But thank God that's coming to an end very soon.
We just passed on February the 30th anniversary of the Brothers to the Rescue shootdown. All 3 of you actually wrote to President Trump, and you all talked about the evidence that Raul Castro was the one who ordered that to happen. You asked the Trump administration for justice, and it actually sounds like justice may be coming. Representative Gimenez, what does that mean for the Cuban regime, and how would that process play out?
I think that's another nail in the coffin of the Cuban regime. Raul actually admitted to it. I mean, on a number of occasions that he was the one that ordered that. And this was a humanitarian flight in international waters, an unarmed plane, and they killed 3 American citizens and an American resident. why it's taken 30 years for this indictment to come down is beyond us. The family needs some sense of justice. But then again, now we indict, Raul Castro. And as, my colleague, Mario has said, President Trump is the one president that says enough is enough. We are not going to stand by and have a threat to our national security exist 90 miles from our shore like it has for the last 67 years. You look at these drones. Some of these drones go 1,000 kilometers. That's 600 miles. And if this regime is allowed to remain, I will guarantee you, the one thing they're going to do, they're going to look to their little friends in Iran and other parts of the world and say, we need some more. And one thing I'll also say is, Cubans, when we're good, we're really good. When we're bad, boy, we're really bad. Okay?
That's right.
And so,
we're the good ones.
Okay?
We're the good ones. We're representing.
And so when you look around this hemisphere, when you have nefarious actions happening around, Cuba is somehow involved.
I think we should put into context what you were saying about the 1996 when Raul was the defense minister and he gave the order to shoot down those 2 American planes. What they were doing was basically, I'm not sure if your audience knows, they were spotting rafters, because there was a time when the rafters would build this little raft and they would, like what I was telling you, that they would expose their children to the sharks. So they would build this little raft and just travel across the strait. And that's why they were shut down. So just imagine how evil this regime is, that they did not even want the Cubans to be saved once they were out of the island. That is what the Castro regime is.
Can you imagine? We think that probably thousands of Cubans died trying to make that trip across the straits.
That's right.
Why are people getting on inner tubes and life rafts just to get out of there? All right. And so that's one of the things that bothers me about some of the colleagues that I have that here on the other side of the aisle. They're defending. This is indefensible. The United States, what they're doing now is trying to bring freedom, democracy to what used to be the gem of the Caribbean. And it can be the gem of the Caribbean, the pearl of the Caribbean once more.
Given the humanitarian situation that obviously is the crisis that's happening in Cuba, do you expect that we will see more Cuban immigrants coming to America right now? And is that something we can handle?
If the average Cuban on the island knows that the United States is going to provide help, we're talking about electricity, water, food, medicine, I am sure that just sending the signal from the United States that we are going to help you, we're going to take care of you until there is a transition to democracy and free market economy, the Cubans will stay in Cuba knowing that help is on the way.
There's also another aspect
What do you say?
to that. Look, the regime has used massive immigration as a weapon. When did we have the massive immigration from emigration from Cuba? Only during Democratic administrations. Why? Because they know that Democrats are weak and they can blackmail them. It didn't happen under Reagan. It didn't happen under the Bushes, and it sure as heck didn't happen under Trump. And so my attitude to that is, let's watch them try it and see what happens right now. I have zero fear about that. And to your specific question, is the U.S. ready? Yes. Southern Command is always planning for that.
Right.
But the key is this: it's American leadership. It only happened under Democratic presidents. It sure as heck would not happen with this president. And if they tried it, I think that would be a very quick end to that regime.
I agree with Mario. The pressure relief valve that has been this mass migration has been one of the reasons why the regime has lasted so long. And so this president understands that. I don't think we're going to be accepting mass migration. The solution to it all is a change of regime. The regime has to go so we can have freedom, democracy, investment. Believe me, there are thousands of Cubans in the diaspora that want to invest in Cuba and bring it back to what it used to be, actually better than what it used to be. And so, no, I don't think we're going to be accepting any more mass migration. Not this president. I'm sure, this president and the Secretary of State are certainly not going to fall for that one.
Well, let me ask you this. A lot of Americans listen to this and they say, well, we feel badly about what's going on in Cuba, but why should we care? What would a prosperous, successful Cuba mean for the American people?
I envision a free Cuba as kind of like the Israel of this hemisphere. Let me tell you why I tell you that. A beacon of freedom, an example of of failure, and then now with a democratic free Cuba, of what freedom does and what communism used to do, right? I think then we would also have the strongest ally to promote American values, which are the values of freedom, of prosperity, of democracy. That's what a free Cuba would be. And now what we have is just the opposite. State sponsor of terrorism, hurting our national security interests, hurting our allies, and even influencing places as far away as Europe. That goes away, replaced by what I believe would be, frankly, the jewel. Again, I look at Israel and I think, my gosh, imagine having that here in the Western Hemisphere.
If you could speak directly to the Cuban people right now, what would your message be to them? What would you tell them in terms of holding out hope and, hope for maybe a better future, Representative?
The light is at the end of the tunnel. Wow, we've never been this close to seeing a change and this regime, actually being ousted. And so there's a lot of hope in Cuba right now, a lot of hope. We have the right president. We have the right Secretary of State. You have 3 Cuban Americans that, and a very, very small majority in the House of Representatives that are working for your cause, and we will never forget you. And so my message is, it's going to happen.
I think that we should really praise the Lord Almighty because he has put favor and grace in the heart of President Trump, and Marco Rubio is next to the president, that we understand their pain, that we represent many of their family members, that we know what's happening because of the cultural code that we all share, but that this is the moment of freedom, that freedom is coming, that not to lose hope, not to lose faith, that once again, the United States, the best country on earth, is coming to the rescue.
I'm convinced that President Trump, there's so many great things he's done and it will continue to do. Yes. But I'll tell you what, you know what he's going to be remembered for? For the liberator of the Western Hemisphere. Trump is going to be the one word that is going to symbolize freedom, prosperity, and hope for all eternity.
For 100 years to come.
Simón Bolívar.
Yeah. I mean, forget it. It will be Trump. It will be Jose Marti and Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
And we're not exaggerating.
No,
we
we're
know,
not.
we represent them. We know exactly what the Cubans are feeling, and that's exactly, and thank God for Marco Rubio, who also has Cuba on his DNA.
And that's why, by the way, the Cuban people, and we see that in election after election, have voted for Trump.
Us.
Us, but all the people that we represent, higher in proportion than anybody else in the country.
80%,
Why?
85%.
Because we know who Trump is, we know what he stands for, and the Cuban people in Cuba, they're waiting for President.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.